African leaders have met this week in the United States of America for the annual U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. The three-day summit has featured announcements of new U.S.-Africa relationships in all spheres. Daniel Casaon has more on that.
The United States invited most leaders of the African continent from the African Union members to reinvigorate ties to the nations in all spheres. One key topic is the fate of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, the 2000 deal that granted duty-free access to the United States market for most products from sub-Saharan nations that meet standards on rights and democracy. President Joe Biden indicated this is the first of its kind summit between the two sides.
African ideas and innovation helping to shape the solutions, and African population contributing to every step. So the only question when I took office was not if we'd host another U.S.-African Leadership Summit, but when. My administration's engagement with Africa and the priority we place on these relationships began on day one. We've been working steadily with regional diplomacy and investments to demonstrate our commitment.
Thursday is dedicated to high-level discussions among leaders, with President Joe Biden opening the day with a session on partnering on Agenda 2063, the African Union's strategic vision for the continent. Earlier, President Biden highlighted the summit has featured announcements of new United States and Africa relationships in all spheres.
And the United States is committed to supporting every aspect of Africa's inclusive growth. All of you, the deals you've signed, the investments we've made together are concrete proof of the enduring commitment we're making to one another, government to government, business to business, people to people.
The session would have immense contribution for Ethiopia to enhance its economic ties with the United States.
The International Monetary Fund has been providing lots of financial support to Ethiopia for long, and this is really commendable. But in recent times, there were some challenges, and we are now urging for the continuation of their support following the peace deal. The Premier had candid discussion with respective officials. Green light is shown from their discussion. We have made thorough discussion with the World Bank officials on their financial support to Ethiopia. Now Ethiopia is after a prolonged war and the bank's support is highly needed. We have talked over it. Our Prime Minister has briefed all the officials about his reform programs and the interaction he wants with the international organization.
The three-day session concluded with a discussion on food security and food systems resilience, a critical issue for African partners who have been disproportionately impacted by the rise in food and fertilizer prices.
Now, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia announces that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's working visit to the U.S. will strengthen diplomatic relations between Ethiopia and the international organizations. The spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Meles Alem, delivered a weekly statement regarding Ethiopia's current diplomatic activities. Jerusalem Batsi has more on that.
The U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit from December 13 up to 15, 2022 in Washington, D.C. has created a platform to strengthen Ethiopia's diplomatic relations with the U.S. and other international organizations. In the weekly briefing, spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Meles Alem, indicated that Ethiopia's Prime Minister participation in the 2022 U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit has significantly demonstrated Ethiopia's effective diplomatic activity.
ክቡር የፌዴሪ ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትር ዶክተር አብይ አህመድ በአሜሪካ ቆይታቸው
In his stay in the United States, Prime Minister Abiy has held productive discussion with various United States officials to strengthen bilateral ties with the United States and international organizations. On this move, the Premier has constructive discussions with United States Secretary of State Blinken and United States National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan over a host of issues, including the implementation of the cessation of hostilities and the political and economic reform initiatives of the government and the way forward on revitalizing the historical bilateral relationship.
The spokesperson reiterated the US-Africa Leaders Summit has created an opportunity to further enhance the long-standing diplomatic friendship between Ethiopia and the United States. According to Alem, the Premier also affirmed Ethiopia's stance on different sideline discussions with US officials. The statement also stressed on the Premier's discussion with the Managing Director of IMF and other representatives of international organizations, which is said to help Ethiopia's transformative economic reform agenda.
In the sidelines of the United States Africa Leaders Summit, Prime Minister Abiy has discussed with international organizations on Ethiopia's need for debt resolutions to help Ethiopia's rehabilitation works. In this regard, the World Bank has recently approved $745 million grant in development support for peace and reconstruction after the conflict in the northern part of the country. This is a great achievement. Therefore, we can say the Premier's working visit is fruitful.
Furthermore, spokesperson Melles recalled that Ethiopia received a major award in recognition of its success in Green Legacy Initiative to address the adverse impacts of climate change, stating that the Green Legacy Initiative is becoming a joint project of all Africans.
Well, dear viewers, let's now turn our attention to trending stories over the past 24 hours. And this week, of course, regarding the US-Africa Leaders Summit. And to tell me more in this regard, I'm joined in the studio by my colleague, Haptamo Ashagre. Stay with us. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Now, this US-Africa Leaders Summit has been going on this week. What are some of the things that you observed in this regard?
Over the past 24 hours, there are a lot of international media outlets disseminating information related within the West African Leaders Summit that was held in Washington, D.C. And Ethiopia was represented by His Excellency Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed successfully undertaking a lot of issues connected within this West Africa Leaders Summit in Washington. As you remember, that is, U.S. government is over the past 2 years, that is, there's confrontation within the government of Ethiopia within connection with the conflict in the northern part of Ethiopia at PLF, and the federal government is undertaking a lot of disputes. Before, there have been signed a peace agreement in Pretoria and Kenya. After that, this successful meeting is using those Ethiopia and US is undertaking a lot of activities to boost their bilateral ties and a lot of issues within the African continent. And Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed will discuss with U.S. State Secretary Antonio Blinken, the U.S. government president, that is Joe Biden, and other senior government officials, including the U.S. Security Advisor Sullivan. And they always discuss about how to cement their bilateral ties and how to undertaking a lot of relations within how to boost their bilateral ties, including how to implement the cessation of hostilities after the signing of Pretoria peace agreement with the PLF forces, and how to support the U.S. government in politics and economic reform activities in Ethiopia over the past 4 years. And these leaders are discussing in these matters, and related within Ethiopia is also showing its commitment how to bring peace and stability in the whole region. As the Prime Minister mentioned, the government of Ethiopia is always committed to implement the peace agreement in order to ensure sustainable development all over Ethiopia, and they are also showing this commitment and their support to Ethiopia how to implement this implementation of the cessation of hostilities. And Ethiopia also discussing within anchor investors in United States and Ethiopian diasporas how to support the ongoing reform in Ethiopia, including
Right.
political and economic reforms. And Ethiopia is showing the untapped resource in investment sectors, how U.S. government and the U.S.-based companies or anchor investors are investing and doing business in Ethiopia.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to give a boost to the bilateral ties between Ethiopia and international organizations and the U.S. Definitely.
Absolutely. The Prime Minister also discussing with the IMF leaders, World Bank leaders,
Yeah.
how to support the government of Ethiopia's program to implement sustainable development all over Ethiopia.
Haftamu, thank you so much for that idea.
You're welcome.
Now moving on, the Joint Ministerial Committee for War-Affected Areas of Ethiopia announced that the humanitarian support and rehabilitation activities being carried out in Tigray, Amhara and Afar regions is progressing well. The committee said efforts are underway to solve the problems facing it to achieve the desired results. However, fuel supply remains a major challenge, said the committee. Goshumalsa has the latest on that.
The Joint Ministerial Committee is mandated to monitor the humanitarian support and resume basic services in conflict-affected areas of northern Ethiopia. Evaluating the performance of preliminary and implementation phase of restoration process, the Joint Ministerial Committee announced the rehabilitation activities and humanitarian supports which are being carried out in Tigray, Amhara and Afar regions are progressing well. In its report, the committee said more than 6.9 million people in Amhara, Afar and Tigray regions need emergency food and non-food assistance. The committee revealed that over 85,000 metric tons of food was delivered by partners and the government has provided 14,000 metric tons of food since December. According to the committee, some 85% transmission line test and repair work has been undertaken in war-ravaged areas. Relentless efforts are underway to finalize the remaining workers in the coming 2 months, the committee noted.
After a lot of efforts of the pertinent bodies and workers, these results have been achieved. The rehabilitation and resumption of basic services in northern Ethiopia is progressing well and it is encouraging.
The committee has not hidden the problems it faced while implementing its mandate to restore basic services, mentioning fuel supply constraints a major challenge.
We transported fuel from various areas of Amhara region with a barrel to undertake our activities in Aksum, Shirey and Arua. We use a generator there and in return the generator needs another fuel to restart.
አገልግሎት ለመስጠት ያስቸግረዋል። ለክትባት እነዚህ የሶላር የሚሰሩ ሬፍሪጀሬተሮች
We have sent close to 15 solar refrigerators to Tigray healthcare centers and hospitals to start vaccination. It's being installed. We will send the vaccine soon.
እሱ እንደጀመሩ ክትባቱን በቀጣይ ይላካል።
ከስተመር ሰርቪስ ስራዎችን ለመስራት
It is important to reinstate Ethiopian electric utility workers in Tigray to provide customer services. We set directions to do our works.
በሌሎችም እንደተነሳ አቅጣጫ ያስፈልጋል ማለት ነው።
The committee said efforts are underway to solve the problems it is facing to achieve the desired results. However, fuel supply remains a major challenge.
የተጀመሩ ሰርቪሶችም ያው
We have restored services based on our capacity and resources. Next, we need to mobilize our resources and emphasize to services that needs priority.
ቀጣይ አቅጣጫዎች የተሰጡ
In resuming services, Ethio Telecom has done commendable work, as it was noted in the report.
Now, the former South African Deputy President Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka says Africans have all the needed knowledge and expertise to solve their problems and can depend on each other. She was the member of the high-level panel to the AU-led peace process between the government of Ethiopia and TPLF in Pretoria. Kazam Chan has compiled the following story from the Ethiopian news agency.
In an exclusive interview with the Ethiopian news agency, former South African Deputy President said that Africans need to support a peace agreement in Ethiopia and encourage for its implementation. According to her, Africans should support Ethiopians to implement the agreement in full and to look for more opportunities to make a difference in Ethiopia. She pointed out that the two parties are working very hard, emphasizing there is still a lot to do.
Means that as Africans we have the knowledge of what needs to be done in Africa. We can depend on each other, we can depend on the people of Ethiopia, we can depend on fellow Africans who want to support the Ethiopians.
The government has been intensifying efforts to provide humanitarian aid with international partners and from air's resources through all corridors on land and by air transport. The government is also mobilizing resources for the restoration of basic services, electricity, water, health, education, and rebuilding destroyed infrastructure facilities.
Now, moving on, the World Bank disclosed that vulnerable Ethiopians will benefit from $745 million in grants for improved access to health services and flood management projects. The World Bank, in its press release issued, stated that Ethiopians have been impacted by multiple crises, including COVID-19, climate-related disasters, and conflict in recent years, disrupting the delivery of essential health services, undermining the progress in the health outcomes and service delivery achieved over the past decade. According to the statement, nearly 24 million people in conflict-affected areas are without access to adequate health services. And in recent years, flood events in Ethiopia have significantly increased in magnitude, frequency, and intensity. To support Ethiopia's people as they face ongoing challenges, the World Bank Group has adopted a more people-centered approach to its program in Ethiopia with a strong focus on meeting basic needs and providing basic services to the vulnerable.
The 70s Global Institute.
It's expected that Ethiopia is Ethiopians
Our news is always aired on Monday to Friday on 11 a.m. and 9 p.m. and also on Saturday and Sunday on 9 p.m. Make sure to follow us.